D1, there was once a girl whom all of America loved, a child with red hair, bright eyes, and not a hint of intimidation in front of the camera. People called her the future of Hollywood, and Disney crowned her as their next generation star. However, a few years later, that girl found herself standing not on a glamorous red carpet, but in the middle of a cold courtroom. Inside the courtroom, broadcast live nationwide, Lindsay Lohan realized for the first time that she was no longer in control of everything. As the judge handed down the sentence, her face instantly crumbled, and she grabbed her lawyer's arm, desperately trying to somehow reverse the situation. But in that moment, no one could save her. And then, without any warning, everything fell apart. The star, once surrounded by millions of fans, ultimately ended up in solitary confinement in an American prison. The world mocked her, and the media seemed to be waiting for the final scene of the fallen genius girl. Ironically, however, the time spent at the lowest point of her life began to turn Lindsay Lohan's life in a completely different direction. Lindsay Lohan's story is not just a tale of a Hollywood star's downfall. It is the story of a child who tasted success at too young an age, thrown into the world's desires and the violence of the camera before even becoming an adult. People only remembered her mistakes, but not many were willing to look deeply into the background where those mistakes grew. Lindsay did not have a normal childhood. What she learned within her family was anxiety rather than stability, and learning how to endure came before learning how to be protected. When the child smiled, it made money, and the better she did in front of the camera, the longer her family's livelihood could be sustained. On the outside, it looked like success, but on the inside, something was breaking down. When she entered the center of Hollywood, people saw the birth of a genius child actor. At the same time, however, from that moment on, it became difficult for Lindsay to exist simply as a child. She became a product, an image, and an entity that had to smile in the way people wanted. When Lindsay Lohan was around 4 years old, her father went to prison. He was sentenced to 3 years for illegal stock trading. However, that was only the beginning of a long period of turmoil for the family. Even after his release, her father faced the law multiple times for drunk driving, theft, and assault, and the instability in the household did not easily fade away. With the head of the household faltering, the family had to face practical problems. They needed living expenses, and everyone had to make money somehow. Lindsay, who was only 5 years old, was no exception. Before she even knew how harsh the world was, she was already entering the world of adults. There was a fact that no one knew at the time. Even at a young age, Lindsay was not afraid of the camera. Her bright smile, natural movements, and relaxed demeanor in front of strangers immediately caught the attention of industry insiders. She began working as a child model and subsequently appeared in dozens of TV commercials, living a life completely different from her peers. What she showed on commercial sets was not just the charm of a cute child. She had the ability to understand directions, change her expressions, and accurately convey the emotions the camera wanted. In this way, Lindsay became a child helping to support her family's livelihood, while simultaneously growing into a little actress, drawing the industry's attention. In 1998, at the age of 12, Lindsay officially entered the film industry, and right from her debut, it was no ordinary role. She had to play twin sisters all by herself in the movie The Parent Trap. It was a role that required her not just to play two children, but to convincingly portray two individuals raised in completely different environments. What is even more surprising is that other promising child actors also competed for this role at the time. Among them was Scarlett Johansson, who would later become a leading Hollywood actress. However, the production team ultimately chose Lindsay. After the movie was released, that choice proved to be an incredibly bold and accurate decision. Behind the camera, the story was completely different. In the movie, Lindsay played twins who grew up in different countries due to their parents' divorce. One was a child raised in the U.S., and the other was raised in the U.K. Therefore, Lindsay had to change not only her personality, but also her accent for every scene. Switching between American and British accents, she delivered a performance so natural that audiences mistook them for actual twins. Many viewers only realized after watching the movie that both roles were played by the same actress. People were shocked. It was hard to believe that a 12-year-old child could pull off such emotional control in technical acting. With just one movie, Lindsay announced the birth of a new child star. Following the success of The Parent Trap, Disney did not let Lindsay go. The movie became a box office hit, far exceeding its production budget, and Lindsay instantly became the brightest face in the family movie market. She showed natural showmanship, even switching between the two characters on the spot during interviews. Despite her young age, she already knew exactly what she had to do on stage. Disney offered her additional movie roles, and Lindsay began to emerge as the symbol of teen stars in the early 2000s. At the time, people did not see her merely as a pretty child actress. While there were many child actors who gained attention for their looks in that era, Lindsay was a rare actress recognized for her acting skills. But what happened next changed everything. In Freaky Friday, Lindsay once again delivered a complex performance akin to playing two roles. In the film, she had to portray a teenage girl obsessed with rock music, while also expressing the inner workings of a perfectionist middle-aged doctor after their bodies were swapped. It was by no means an easy challenge for a teenage actor, but Lindsay pulled off the role masterfully. The movie was a huge success, and the director gave Lindsay another opportunity. That project was Mean Girls, which is still talked about today as a legend among teen movies. Lindsay starred alongside actors like Rachel McAdams and Amanda Seyfried, who would later become central figures in Hollywood, and the film became a beloved classic across generations. In that movie, Lindsay played a girl who transfers to a new school, gets caught up in a power struggle within a clique, and gradually changes within that structure herself. It was not a simple revenge story, but contained a narrative where both victims and perpetrators grew and fell apart in their respective positions. Because of this, the movie strongly resonated not only with teenagers, but also with adults. The psychological warfare and political dynamics within the school seemed like a microcosm of human relationships repeated in workplaces and society. Lindsay led the story at its center, and her presence became the force that held the entire movie together. Afterwards, she continued her box office success in other movies, and even debuted as a singer, releasing a successful album and becoming a star who crossed over between acting and singing. The problem was that Lindsay was only 17 years old at the time. The world believed she would lead the next generation of Hollywood. Production companies wanted her for more roles, and the media turned her every move into an article. However, Lindsay herself was not ready to handle that pace. As soon as she became an adult, she began relieving stress in a completely different way. The biggest cause was the paparazzi. Even when Lindsay stepped out of her house for a moment to check the mail, cameras followed her. Strangers called her name, talked to her, and flashed their cameras. It was an overly aggressive level of attention for a teenage girl to handle. This is the part that most people never hear about. The paparazzi didn't just stop at taking pictures. To get a shot of Lindsay getting angry, they would intentionally and dangerously tailgate her vehicle. Lindsay knew she was being followed and called the police, but an accident occurred before the police could even arrive. Even right after the collision, cameras were shoved in her face. Her life was like a prison without bars. Wherever she went, someone followed, and thousands of photos were taken and consumed by the public every day. What was even more painful was that even the people who were supposed to protect her used those photos for promotion. Film studios and her agency bought paparazzi photos to use on posters, packaging them as natural and attractive images. At one point, everything seemed to revolve around Lindsay, but the movies she starred in after becoming an adult consistently fell short of expectations. In particular, her romantic comedy projects were criticized as cliché and failed at the box office, and several subsequent works also failed to yield good results. For Lindsay, who had hardly known box office failure during her childhood, it was her first bitter downfall. As career pressure and the relentless pursuit of the paparazzi combined, Lindsay began to move in an increasingly dangerous direction. She broke out of her reclusive lifestyle, went out frequently, and dove deep into party culture. At first, it seemed like an escape, but over time it became a pathway that destroyed her life. Alcohol and drugs dragged her further and further down. Instead of taking care of herself, Lindsay got through the days by ruining herself. At the time, she was frequently spotted with Paris Hilton and Britney Spears, and the media consumed the three of them by calling them mocking nicknames. The public watched them as a spectacle rather than worrying about them. When the truth finally came out, it was something much darker than anyone had expected. Around that time, Lindsay also drew significant attention for her relationship with Samantha Ronson. Samantha was a DJ and songwriter, and the two were spotted together on multiple occasions. Although the relationship was consumed by the public as something unfamiliar and provocative at the time, some of Lindsay's fans were actually relieved, saying she looked stable. In fact, Lindsay once participated diligently in addiction treatment, seemingly trying to turn her life around. However, the relationship did not remain stable for long. One early morning, unable to reach Samantha, Lindsay waited in front of her house for hours. It wasn't until 5 a.m. that Samantha appeared, and Lindsay, feeling betrayed, demanded an explanation. Their fight quickly became prey for the paparazzi. The paparazzi camped out in front of Samantha's house and even tried to film their argument leaking through the window. The private conflict between the two was no longer just their problem. It spread as articles, videos, mockery, and comments. Eventually, the two broke up after about a year of dating. And after that, Lindsay began repeating extreme choices once again. Her alcohol and drug problems worsened again, leading to legal issues such as theft and drunk driving. Many people could not understand the fact that she was accused of theft. They thought that a star who was once the most successful in Hollywood would at least be financially comfortable. In reality, however, Lindsay was in severe financial distress due to excessive spending and unstable income. To make money, Lindsay even chose to shoot a pictorial for an adult magazine. It was a Marilyn Monroe-themed shoot, but the public's reaction was not as enthusiastic as expected. She was once a star the world paid attention to, but now the media viewed her not as an actress with the potential for a comeback, but as a fallen troublemaker. The court ordered her to wear an ankle monitor to monitor her repeated drinking problems. It was a device that detected alcohol levels, intended to ensure Lindsay was following the court's orders. However, for someone who was already so broken down, even that device was not enough of a deterrent. One night, her levels went up, and it was revealed that she had also missed court-ordered counseling. And then, without any warning, everything fell apart. Standing in court again, Lindsay received a sentence she had not expected. The judge ordered her to serve 90 days in jail. Lindsay shed tears right there, and the scene was broadcast live nationwide. An actress who was once the idol of countless children was now being consumed as a figure breaking down in a courtroom. Upon entering jail, Lindsay was placed in solitary confinement rather than a general cell. The ostensible reason was protection. It was determined that as a celebrity, she might be attacked by other inmates. However, just because it was labeled as protection didn't mean the suffering was lessened. Solitary confinement is a space that completely isolates a human being. Inside a small room without even a proper window, almost all personal belongings are taken away, and the only thing one can do is think. Even if allowed out of the room for a brief moment a day, talking to others is not permitted. Time passed slowly, and the silence weighed down on her body more and more heavily. How much the pain of solitary confinement affects the human mind is known through various experiments and cases. Stories of isolated animals showing abnormal behavior in a short time, and human experiment participants also being unable to endure it and requesting to stop after just a few days, show that solitary confinement is not simple imprisonment, but an environment that causes psychological collapse. Inside, Lindsay had no choice but to reflect on her life. She asked herself over and over why she had ended up here, whether she could go back to the way things were, and if she still had a chance to start a new life. Her tears wouldn't stop, and a single hour felt as long as 10. Fortunately, Lindsay did not serve the full 90 days. Due to prison overcrowding issues, inmates with relatively minor offenses were released early, and she too was let out after just 14 days. It was a short time, but for Lindsay, that period was a shock that made her look at her entire life anew. After her release, she began by changing her surroundings. She cut ties with the people who kept dragging her down and diligently participated in addiction treatment again. Her lifestyle gradually stabilized, and the days of being in the news every day for incidents and accidents decreased. However, her return as an actress was not easy. On the outside, it looked like a success, but on the inside, something was crumbling. From the perspective of film studios, Lindsay was still a risky name. Her past image was too strong, and casting her as a lead was too much of a burden. The roles that came to her were mostly minor parts with little screen time. However, Lindsay accepted even those with gratitude. Sometimes she even took on roles that caricatured her own past image, slowly softening the public's animosity. The problem was the paparazzi. As Lindsay showed signs of slow recovery, cameras flocked to her once again. To her, the sound of flashing cameras was not just a simple shutter noise. It was a sound that brought back past fears and feelings of helplessness. Whether she asked politely or got angry, the paparazzi did not stop. So Lindsay made an extreme decision. She decided to leave the United States. The place she chose was Dubai. The reason she chose a city in the United Arab Emirates rather than a Western country with a similar culture was clear. Paparazzi activities were strictly restricted there, and for the first time, Lindsay was able to escape the pursuit of cameras and reclaim her daily life. In Dubai, she became just another person in the crowd. She walked the streets, went to bookstores, bought popcorn to watch movies, and spent ordinary time without needing anyone's permission. The everyday life that once seemed so taken for granted became her greatest freedom. And in that peace, Lindsay slowly became the master of her own life. While her life in Dubai continued, Lindsay found a new love. Her partner was a Kuwaiti man working in finance, and their meeting began by chance at a restaurant. Lindsay struck up a conversation with him as he sat at the next table, and they naturally started talking. The two, who connected comfortably from the start, quickly grew close. Around that time, Lindsay was making her return to the film industry. After a long period of playing minor roles, she made her comeback as the lead in a Netflix romantic comedy, and there were moments on set where her reality and the movie strangely overlapped. On the day she filmed a scene receiving a proposal in the movie, her real-life boyfriend also visited the set and proposed by placing a ring on a cake. Lindsay was so overwhelmed with emotion that she shed tears to the point of having to stop filming. This is the part that most people never hear about. After getting married, she began living a more stable life and stood before the public again through her Netflix projects. Falling for Christmas received a good response. An Irish Wish, which was released later, also achieved high results in Netflix's global movie rankings. People expressed surprise and support seeing Lindsay, who had once even gone to jail, return as a lead actress. Her comeback was even compared to the story of Robert Downey Jr. He too experienced deep turmoil in his youth, and only after going through legal troubles and prison time did he open a new prime in his middle age. Lindsay too, after passing through rock bottom, was slowly reclaiming her name. Currently, Lindsay is scheduled to participate in the sequel to Freaky Friday, one of her representative works. It is essentially a return to the same world after a whopping 20 years. The news that the director and main actors are reuniting has brought great anticipation to longtime fans. The time she once thought was lost seemed to be returning to her hands, and she became a mother. Lindsay, who had a son after getting married, returned to her home in Dubai one day after a long shoot. As soon as she opened the front door, she called her son's name with a bright smile, but unlike usual, there was no answer. Entering the living room, she saw her son completely engrossed in the TV screen. On that screen was Lindsay from her childhood. The Parent Trap, which she starred in around the age of 9, was playing. Her son was staring at the screen as if recognizing his mother's younger self, and Lindsay couldn't hold back her tears in that moment. It was because the fact that her own life was a story more cinematic than any movie was entirely captured in that single scene. At one time, the world watched her downfall, but now Lindsay Lohan's story does not end with a downfall. It is the story of a person who shined too early and crumbled too deeply, but ultimately reclaimed her own life. Thank you for watching until the end today. If you liked the video, please like, subscribe, and share. I'll see you again in the next video.